meeting. And can I welcome, first of all, Andrew Downley, who is chair of the Townsdeal Fund, who will be speaking to that item further on the agenda. Good, okay. So, can we take apologies? Any apologies, Jackie?
Chair, apologies have been received from Councillor Davis and Councillor Stewart.
Thanks very much. Declarations of interest. Do we have any declarations of interest again?
Item 3, the quarter assurance report. There's mention of a property in Elm Hill and the Norwich Preservation Trust. I'm the director of the Norwich Preservation Trust.
Mm-hmm.
And item 11, I'm a director of Norwich North Building Limited. I don't think that precludes me from actually participating in that particular paper.
Okay, thank you very much. And Beth?
Similarly, Preservation Trust.
Preservation Trust. Okay. Right. So we should also be taking the minutes as an extraordinary meeting, right? Okay. So corporate assurance report, which is starts on page 5 and runs to page 90. This is in my name. This is a mix of different elements, and there is a finance element to this, which I'll be asking Councillor Kendrick to speak to when I've looked at the reported on the progress against key performance indicators and the corporate risk register. Can I say at the outset, I think this is an excellent report and an informative report, and it's a report I think that council colleagues would do well to have as a reference, and also it's of great benefit to interested members of the public because it gives a detailed insight into the work of the council and an opportunity to look at the performance of the council in a number of key areas across our 3 directorates. So there are recommendations on page 5 which we will come back to. It relates to the 11th quarterly performance report of the corporate plan 2019 to 2022. It looks at the financial landscape as well as the corporate risk register and highlights some key corporate risks. So I've had an opportunity to work my way through this, and I'm just going to touch on 1 or 2 areas which I think of particular interest. And there's a useful executive summary on page 11, and it gives an indication of where you can find the relevant KPI details and the performance of each of the directorates. And I think a very useful element to each of those directorates is their successes and challenges and case study, which we're familiar with. And of course, there's the data about the traffic light performance of the different directorates. And one, I think, key point comes out of this in relation to the number of red traffic lights that's been greatly reduced. So, just picking out some of the things that I thought were of particular interest, and page 19 of the report, and I'm using the numeration at the bottom of the page, pages 19 of 158. So on page 19 is, I think, a particularly important reference to assessing climate change risk. And on page 20, there's been a very interesting piece of work looking at the forecasts for Norwich's climate moving from our present decade into the 2050s and the 2080s, and based on the latest Met Office data. And it describes a climate which will be prone to flooding, a number of risks in relation to rising temperatures, and the disproportionate impact that will have on disadvantaged communities. We hope to be a more equal society at some point in advance of some of those more dramatic trends, unless they are mitigated by rigorous climate change policies. So the risks are identified there, and there's continued work in this area to finalise the risk scoring and action plans. And energy efficiency in relation to domestic and rented properties is clearly a key area that we have set as a high priority. If we move on further to page 27, it's just interesting to note the number of unbudgeted grants that we received in 2021-22. Many of those are related to tackling some of the effects of COVID, which as we know, highlighted the depth of inequality in the city and exacerbated it. And on page 28, I do have one question which I'd like just picked up now. The Omicron Hospitality and Leisure Grant, you notice that that's a substantial grant from government of over £2 million to be delivered in a tight timetable. Is there any update on that, Annabelle?
No.
At the moment, but it's progressing in terms of putting together a scheme. It is, okay. And we remember, don't we, that governments make the announcements and then we have to wait for the detail before we can do the work. I think the detail has been provided there.
It has been provided in the team.
It has been provided, Leader, and the team are in a position where they're trying to finalise the detail this week. We've done some estimating around what the values will need to be to make sure that we get the greatest outreach possible. We know we can't get 100% take up on whatever scheme we put in place. We're just trying to make sure that we maximise the reach and obviously utilise all the funding that's come through. But hopefully by the end of this week, Leader, we should have something to share.
That's excellent, thank you very much. So turning now to page 33, risk for further waves of COVID-19. Myself and the Chief Executive attended a regular meeting with Norfolk leaders and public health looking at COVID strategy. One of the things that concerned me particularly with the stepping down from a framework for COVID, for further COVID developments, was whether we had in place and whether government were mindful of another wave of COVID and what action we would have be able to make based on an infrastructure that needs to be put in place to respond to any further outbreaks. Public Health, Louise Smith and her team have gone away to have a look at what would be necessary to respond to local outbreaks, but more crucially, be able to have the data to monitor the development of a COVID event. We know that COVID is not over, it's got many more twists and turns, but we need that local infrastructure, we need that crucial data, so that's one particular thing I think is particularly important. Page 43. I think it's 43. Yes, but actually it was the reference, no it's not 43, it's the reference to the new Environment Act in relation, which came into force in 2021. No specific dates for its implementation, but one thing that does concern us in particular, sorry it's page 47, forgive me, at the bottom of the third column, an issue about the free collection of garden waste, which has been something which we think government is considering. I think the cost to this council to do that, if I remember correctly, something in the order of £2 million. A significant destabiliser of budgets. So that I think is a particular risk. And on page 51, you'll be relieved to hear this is the last point I want to make. This is in relation to, I think I've got my numeration wrong, but this is in relation to elections. And yes, it is page 40, page 50, page 50. What this perhaps doesn't cover, of course, is, a concern that we all share, which is about the impediments to voting, which is embodied in the government's elections bill, which is working its way through the House of Lords at the moment. And I think that's something we need to be aware of, and also to include as part of the risk register in this document. The last part I just wanted to refer to is the very interesting information related to the different directorates. And if we go into the appendices, there are a number of, I think, important and interesting developments. So Appendix A covers community services, and the successes there relate to the appointment of 3 apprentices and also to two placements from City College, the funding for some digital inclusion initiative, and of course there's a vamping up, and there's a theme of this quarter, which is about IT systems, the new academy system for housing, which I think is super duper, and that would add greatly to our efficiency. Issues around access to gas inspections is one of the things which I know is a problem periodically, and that's been highlighted. And Appendix B, we have the successes in relation to the sections that is community services, corporate and commercial services. I noted 10 successes, a lot of work around risk management, internal audit, looking at renewed financial structures, all the work that's gone into the 22-23 budget, which has been excellent. The annual canvas and some work around the procurement plans. Some of the issues there are around recruitment and resource pressures. And again, we have a new IT for the new election system, and the need for a robust backup to that system, which of course is in place. And then finally, the third directorate, Development City Services, successful work in household waste, central recycling, Green Flag Awards, and this will gladden the heart of all councillors, I know, particularly Councillor Kendrick, but it should be a joy to all political groups on the council. The income generated at a very high level of those tenants occupying our investment properties, which is a very good service. And there's a significant piece of work being done by regulatory services following a peer review. So there's a lot of good things in here. I've shared the ones that I particularly thought struck me as especially important. I don't know if there's any further officer comment at this stage. Stephen?
Yeah, just in relation to elections, elections is our biggest annual corporate event, so and there are just a myriad of risks which we always managed to, up until now, mitigate. For next year, I completely agree, we will need to be factoring new risks around the requirements for people to show ID. We are obviously engaging with government, and we expect further advice throughout the year in response to that, but it won't be without risk, and I think if anybody is turned away from a polling station because of this, then it's a negative thing, you know. And I'm on record having written to the government as returning officer to say that I don't think it's a problem that needs solving. Since 2015, less than 150 people have been prosecuted for elections fraud, and if you think about how many million people have voted in various elections over that period. So that's my view as a returning officer. But we will have to put that into the mix and manage it next year.
Thank you very much. And this piece of legislation, I think, in the electoral history of this country, is the first time that the right to vote will be restricted. And it formed the theme of my column in the spring issue of Citizen, which I think is coming out in March. So it's deeply offensive, and it is an exercise effectively in the form of infringing on everybody's right to vote, a system which has a bond of trust between the government and its citizens, and what it basically says is the government doesn't trust its citizens to vote in a proper and legal way, which is pretty rich coming from this government. Okay, let's move on from that. Any Cabinet colleagues, any comments? Councillor Kendrick.
I just want to endorse what Ian Stevens said about the ridiculous proposals by the government to try and restrict voting and demand identification, but photographic identification, I should hasten to say. This is straight from the playbook of the American Republican Party in the southern states of the USA, where of course it is used for voter suppression, especially those of the ethnic minorities, younger voters and poorer voters who are less likely to have photographic identification compared to white, richer and older voters. So it is a fundamental attack upon the rights of ordinary people to actually vote, something that I think is very sad to see.
Thanks very much, Councillor Kendrick. Any other Cabinet colleagues? Yes, okay.
I'd just like to thank officers for the enormous amount of work that's gone into preparing this paper. I have had a briefing this afternoon on the financial aspects, but after being budgeted out last night, I don't think I'll make any comment unless there's any questions.
Thanks, thank you very much. Lucy?
Thank you. Thank you very much for the report. I have read it. It's huge, really important and full of really interesting information. And thank you. There was a lot of questions that I could ask and we'll pick up at other times, but the most important one I think that I'd like to ask is what you highlighted, Alan, first of all, which is the risk register and the work around climate on adding it to the risk register. So I welcome that work coming from directors to assess the risk. But the technical report for the third climate change risk assessment, the CCCRA3, identifies 61 climate risks cutting across multiple sectors. It's a government document. Obviously, there are many actions we can take to improve resilience that would be good value for money, including many low-cost, low-regret actions. And it goes on to say there are many things we can do to build climate change into decisions. So the question I wanted to ask is, it's really good the work's coming from directorates, and I can see that's coming from sort of ground up. But I'm just asking, I'm assuming really, are you making a complementary, comprehensive expert risk assessment and what that process is to look top down, because there are sort of at least 8 priority risk areas and if I've read that report and looked at these risks here, and then I think there's a piece of work to be done to just check, cross-reference across, so you can work bottom up, top down, and just check that they've all been captured, because to my untutored eye, there is some missing at the moment, and it would be so good to have climate in here, in this really excellent corporate assurance reporting, to be there, ongoing and properly captured in all its levels. So to ask really what the process is for identifying and making sure that as well as bottom up becoming top down, we're going to sort of weave all that in. Thank you, and thank you for pointing it out and making it a priority.
Okay. Thank you. Annabelle, who wants to say something on this? Helen, would you like to start?
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for the question, Councillor Galvin. We are absolutely doing that. We've undertaken a piece of work over the last few months to look across the organisation to consider, the activities that we're undertaking, the areas where there may be gaps, the areas where there may be further risks. And with our new environmental strategy manager, has been tasked to take that information and work through that to work out next steps on that. So we will be taking that forward over the next few months.
Okay, thanks very much. So can I just ask, to round this report out, as it were, can I ask Councillor Kendrick if you have anything to say on some of the financial elements to this paper?
Thank you very much, Chair. The report shows the forecast financial outturn position for this financial year as at the 31st of December. The General Fund. The forecast revenue outturn for the General Fund in Q3 shows a £426,000 underspend. There are a number of pressures being identified in services, including around the delivery of this financial year's budget savings, lower income levels from continued COVID-19 impacts, and lower levels of salary underspend than assumed in the corporate vacancy factor. The details on the variance are shown in the Director's summaries. This has been largely offset by reduced corporate financing costs, which includes an additional forecast income from the government sales, fees and charges schemes, that's £280,000, and a reduction in forecast contribution to capital as the programme can be funded within grant allocations at £280,000. Additional income against budget is forecast for the multi-storey car parks, that is £453,000, and investment properties, that is £243,000. These income budgets were amended as part of this financial year's budget setting process to take account of the ongoing impact of COVID-19. The current forecast shows income levels have not dropped as significantly as initially anticipated, but they are not yet at the pre-COVID-19 levels. Forecasts continue to be monitored regularly using the most recently available figures. The housing revenue account. The forecast revenue outturn of the housing revenue account at Q3 shows a £1.576 million underspend. Cost pressures of £1.3 million have been forecast to address issues identified through an internal review of health, safety and compliance in our council homes. This is partially offset by forecast underspend on the housing revenue account repairs programme, that is £763,000. Further details of the variations are shown in the figure of 1.6. Capital. The forecast capital outturn for the General Fund in Q3 shows a £7.63 million underspend. Forecast underspend relate mainly to revised implementation timelines for the number of Town's Funds projects. The forecast capital outturn for the housing revenue account at Q3 shows a £14.493 million underspend. The forecast includes predicted underspends on the upgrade programme in relation to the windows, structural, heating and whole house improvements. There have also been changes to the profiling of spend on new build projects at Threescore, Marcross and Argyle Street. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks very much, Paul. Any comments from Cabinet colleagues? Questions on the figures? Any officer comments that anyone wants to highlight? Are we all okay? Any questions? Lucy, have you got a question? You haven't on this one. Okay. So could we therefore go to the recommendations? Which, sorry? Oh, there's an exempt appendix. There is indeed. Thank you for reminding me. Right, there's an exempt appendix, and we can't take recommendations until we have considered the exempt appendix.
Is there anyone who wants to raise an issue in relation to it? Because we don't
I was about to do that. Yeah, I was about to do that. Okay, so I was just explaining for the benefit of the public the process that we need to go through. But I need to ask my cabinet colleagues, is there anybody who wishes to ask any questions on the exempt appendix? It seems not. So now we can go to the recommendations. And those are outlined on page 5 of our agenda this evening. Can I have indications from cabinet members if you support those recommendations? Thank you very much. Okay, so now we move to the supplementary agenda for item 4. I might add that there are 2 additional agenda items in the supplementary agenda. I'm going to make the renewal of the Microsoft Enterprise License item 9B, but we are now on item 4, which is the Housing Compliance Improvement Plan, and that's in the name of Councillor Harris.
Thank you. So it was agreed that we should provide a regular update to members about health, safety and compliance management and improvement in council homes and buildings. So here we are. This is a regular report which we committed to making to all members following ourselves self-reporting a possible breach of the home standard to the regulator of social housing in July 2021. The RSH found that Norwich City Council breached the home standard and published a regulatory notice. It is important to note that the RSH did not feel it necessary to take any enforcement action against us because it has confidence in our plans to improve service and return to full compliance. Comprehensive plans and proposals are being developed to return NCC homes to the full health and compliance, or to full health and compliance. As you can imagine, this is a very complex area with many different strands and different solutions. The journey from identifying that we were not fully compliant to the completion of all of the work will require the Council to put in long-term changes to the management of the function, alongside the immediate challenges of achieving 100% compliance in all areas. The oversight and governance is provided by the Compliance Board, which has been meeting every 2 weeks to receive updated information, consider progress and agree further actions to be taken. Senior officers meet each month with the RSH to report on progress. As a positive step forward, the RSH has suggested that we enter into a voluntary undertaking, and we are working on moving this forward. The Compliance Improvement Plan is a live document, and we are making good progress in achieving the immediate actions within that plan. The projects and actions in the plan are being prioritised, and the table on page 8 and 9 of your supplementary papers shows the considerable progress that has been made since November. It should also be pointed out that the plan covers general fund assets, and work is underway to secure resources to lead on a mapping exercise of general fund assets and compliance responsibilities. Then we have the compliance dashboard, which shows the position in regard to completed inspections and the remedial work arising from these inspections. This is summarised on page 9 of the report. A priority since November has been to clarify information and data to provide assurance. Information is currently held on a number of different systems and managed by NPSN, who administer the asset management database for the Council, including the compliance data. It will be an incredibly important step when the housing asset management data is transferred to the new housing IT system, NEC. This exercise will include validation and cleanse of the data held and will be completed by the 31st of March 2022. The importance of this cannot be underestimated. There is certainly no need for me to go through this report line by line, but the next steps are important. The contract with NPSN for asset management services will cease, and from the 1st of April 2022, the Council will have full delivery of the services, including the compliance function. We will then have direct management of this activity and better control and prioritisation of the work. The staff transferring back to us will be involved first-hand with the development vision for this service, The expectations that we will have for the service and a training programme will be developed to underpin skills and knowledge, including compliance legislation and contract management. However, we are aware that to undertake the necessary compliance work, we must increase contractor capacity, contractors with the necessary skills. This has been progressed through Eastern Procurement Limited and other framework providers. We have talked of the benefits of the new housing management IT system before. On the back of this, we are purchasing and developing specialist modules to manage repairs, asset management and compliance. This will be ready for the 1st of April and will be a real step change. At the moment, we have not spent as much money as originally forecast, sometimes because the cost of the works have been lower than anticipated, sometimes because the work has taken longer to place than we initially thought. The method of carrying forward underspends for this year is set out in paragraph 41. Within the budget passed last night, money was allocated to continue with the compliance work. So I have to thank officers for the incredible work that they have been doing and will continue to do. They might want to add or comment on what I have said, but my thanks at this stage. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gail. Lou, did you want to come in?
No, Vivian.
Vivian, sorry. There you are. Hello, Vivian.
Thank you, Chair. I'll just say a few brief words, reflecting some of the things or building on some of the things that Councillor Harris has already referred to. This is the first quarter's update in relation to compliance matters following the discussions last November. And since November, the progress has been made in achieving immediate actions in our improvement plan. And just in summary, gas safety and lifts have remained fully compliant. Fire risk assessments for all high-rise residential buildings have now been completed, and only a small number of remedial works are outstanding. Progress has been made in electrical testing, and additional contractor capacity will be available in this area from March to accelerate the programme. Additional contractors have been procured to carry out our water hygiene testing, which will commence during February. Additional specialist contractors have been procured to undertake asbestos inspections and remedial works, with work to commence in February. A key priority has been to clarify information and data to provide assurance, as Councillor Harris has outlined, and this means that our plans are live and subject to change as we continue to make progress in validating data. We are currently working with MPS colleagues to understand our position in more detail and any actions that might be required in relation to asbestos, and we have identified a number of FRAs related to our low-rise blocks that we wish to re-inspect. As stated by Councillor Harris, we have worked closely with the Regulator of Social Housing and have actually held 3 further meetings with them since November, and they continue to be confident in our improvement plans. I think the only additional next step that I would mention that Councillor Harris hasn't mentioned relates to our commitment to continue to consult and to inform our tenants and leaseholders as we move forward from this point. Thank you. Very happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. So I'll open it to Cabinet colleagues. Any questions at this stage? No, I'm sure you've got a question, Lucy, but I'm hoping that it will be a question on the report and not revisit some of the issues that we have explored exhaustively in the past, if you wouldn't mind. Thank you.
Yes, it is on the report. Thank you for the report, and it's good to see it coming to Cabinet as promised. It's obviously really important to stay in touch with tenants who have been well communicated with so far. We welcome the progress in putting things right. I wanted to ask if you'll be looking into, as part of this reporting, how and why this happened. It's obviously extremely costly to the council. So is there a strand within this report that actually looks at how this came about in order that it can't happen again?
I think we have discussed that point exhaustively. Because we had understood exactly what needed to be done and what went wrong, all the energy and efforts, as you would reasonably think should go into achieving compliance against the timetable that we've set down. And our priority is making sure that our tenants get the compliance upgrades as speedily as possible, rather than delving back into a history which is not necessary, simply because we understand what needed to be done through the significant scoping work undertaken and the use of expert advice. So that will not form part of the programme of works, because it is forward-looking, not backward-looking. Right. Any further questions or comments from officers? No. Right. Let's. That's very good. It's good to see this compliance report. We said this would be an open and transparent process, and that is part of that objective and commitment made by the administration, by the council. So, we have a recommendation. We note the content of the report, and that brings us up to date, and it is in the public domain. Okay, all those in favour of accepting the report, could you please indicate? Okay, that is passed. Right, going on now to item 5, this is in my name, which relates to the Greater Norwich Joint 5-Year Infrastructure Investment Plan. This will be familiar to many councillors. It's a product of the Towns deal, that's not the city deal that was agreed in 2013. And the underpinning of that work was groundbreaking initiative by the local authorities involved, that's ourselves, South Norfolk and Broadland, to pool community infrastructure levy monies, and to, within a planned programme of investment, allocate funding to a range of projects across the Greater Norwich area. And it's actually well worthwhile looking at the Greater Norwich Growth Board website, because one of the things that we have done is we have plotted on a map of that Greater Norwich area all the investments that have been made since 2006. And I was talking last night about the sustainability model of social, economic and environmental, and you can see all of those elements built into funding of various projects over that last 15-year period. So I wanted to, and so the governance of this body is that each council, and it includes the county council as well, because there's some funding from that SIL money for educational provision in the Greater Norwich area, is that everybody has particular projects that they favour. There are conditions that arise out of the city deal, particularly, I suppose, noteworthy in this report today, the Long Stratton bypass, which is a South Norfolk initiative, and that we have all to agree collectively and take it through our cabinets on all of the projects. So if, for example, this evening we were to step back and say we didn't support one element of the projects being put forward by one of our fellow councils, the whole lot would go down. So it is a necessary consensus to get things agreed and to move things forward and get those important investments in place. And Norwich, I have to say, does very well out of that pooling of SIL. And it has been able to make a number of significant investments in the city, which of course are to the benefit of the residents of Norwich, but also to people who live in the surrounding area. So it's a very positive set of developments. So if we turn to page 95, page 94 gives you the list of projects that are going forward this year. Paragraph 17, the 7 new projects recommended, 4 are entirely or partly within the City Council area, and they are to be supported by over £4 million worth of SIL funding. And so much of this is in relation to environment and leisure, the Yellow Pedal Way extension, airport to Broadland Northway, Wensum Walkway, city centre, Wensum Lodge, which is an important city asset, and the football development centre on the Heartsease Open Academy. And all of these projects, none of the projects need to be included in the City Council's capital programme because the funding will be held and spent by Norfolk County Council, and there's obviously additional resource from other partners, including the Football Association. So paragraph 19 lays out some of those beneficial investments. The details of the Long Stratton bypass and the mechanism for funding that are included on pages 95 to 96. And also noteworthy, of course, is that 15% of the overall SIL, and I'm looking at the section on neighbourhood community infrastructure commitments and spending, means that is retained within the city for allocation to community projects. And those that are listed are the Feed Social Supermarket Capital Works, very important priority for us as an administration. Match funding for the Good Economy Commission Skills Project, a funding pot for Pledge Norwich, and reducing inequalities provision for staffing costs. So these are important and beneficial projects to the city. Paragraph 30 refers to where there has been some consultation, but also the expectation that project sponsors will ensure consultation takes place on individual projects. So this is very good news. And as I said, it's a groundbreaking model, and I think it still remains a groundbreaking model in terms of the benefits of a pooled SIL model. So I'll open it up for any comments or questions about any of these projects from members or officers. People seem happy with that. It is unalloyed good news for the city. Lucy, do you have a question you'd like to ask?
Yes, please. I would. Thank you. There are some really good things to come out of that. An earlier 5-year infrastructure plan was used to fund from SIL money the NDR, the Norwich to Road, which will actually increase Norfolk's transport carbon emissions by 6.2% between 2018 and 2032. And it's a shame that some of this money is being used to build a dual carriageway. I know it's actually helpful in Long Stratton as a bypass, but it could be done other ways, and developers could perhaps be paying some of the money because it's a dual carriageway in order to open up housing land for 1,800 houses in open countryside. So the shortfall should surely be met by the developer and not from borrowing repaid or using SIL funds intended for public use. How can we claim to be concerned about climate change when we're again signing an agreement to do major road building, particularly a scheme that could be part funded by a developer?
So there are some points, aren't there, Graham, about the role of developers in the housing that will follow on from the building of that Long Stratton bypass?
there are. I mean, in short, the development that is unlocked by the fact that the dual carriageway, Long Stratton bypass, is being funded through this route, and it's only partially funded through SIL, because most of the other costs are drawn from government funding. Effectively, the development that then it unlocks and facilitates replenishes those funding. That's why it's how the Infrastructure Investment Fund works. So the development that then comes forward, which couldn't take place without the bypass in place, pays SIL, and there's a separate legal agreement from the development, so additional funds are also provided by Section 106 agreement to do it. So it's quite a complex mosaic, and the way it works is effectively that the money is drawn down by the city deal, which enables the infrastructure to come forward quicker and the development to be de-risked, so you get more homes, and effectively a virtuous circle of money is how it all works.
So that explains the funding model. I mean, I understand the point you're making about the building of a road, but I have to say that anybody who's driven through Long Stratton, which is heavily congested and traffic moves slowly, there will be a relief to people in terms of their air quality, just in the same way that the Northern Distributor route had certainly improved air quality in the north of the city. And I have to say, living in the north of the city myself, I have noticed the improvement in air quality. And of course, ultimately, in terms of any pollution, it depends on how fast, particularly central government, moves on conversion to electric vehicles, and also investing significantly in public transport, which of course remains a very poor relation. So there are mitigating and ameliorating options, which we hope in the time frame you've described should not unreasonably come forward to make sure that those problems are addressed or seriously reduced. I know we can have a continued discussion about this, Lucy, but we're probably not going to do it now. Right, okay. So we go to the recommendations, which are on page 91. Could I have an indication if you support these recommendations? Thank you very much. So now we move on to item 6. It had occurred to me, Andrew and Sarah, that I might have pushed you up the agenda, but I thought you would like a slice of what cabinet life is like and the kinds of issues that we address as a council, and these are substantial and meaty items. So thank you for your patience and your forbearance, and we're delighted to see you both here this evening. Thank you very much for coming along. So in a moment, I'm going to just briefly introduce this report. Andrew has been chairing the Townsdeal board very skillfully and expertly, and I put on record my appreciation of his commitment to that role, and I should be asking him to sort of speak about the progress on the Townsdeal. I'm delighted Sarah is here as well. She's a very energetic programme manager, driving forward all of the 8 projects as part of this very successful Townsdeal. So really good to see you, and looking forward to any comments from you. And there's one particular element in this in relation to the Revolving Fund, which I know councillors had a briefing on a short time ago, and Cabinet has certainly had a briefing on this at one of their meetings. So with those introductory remarks, we have a very clear narrative on page 105 of the programme we embarked on starting in November 2019 to this point. to becoming one of the most successful towns deals in the country, and I think highly regarded by government in the way that we have worked with different government departments to deliver and progress these really important investments in the city. So, Andrew, could I ask you to make some comments, please?
Yes, and first of all, thank you to the leader for inviting me along to the chamber this afternoon. You've obviously got quite a comprehensive report in the notice on the state, so I thought it'd be worth reflecting on how Norwich has worked the town deal. Having sat in working groups with other chairs in other cities and towns, there are a few points that you may be keen to hear about how Norwich has gone about attracting this investment and then delivering. There are some key points that have obviously come out of why Norwich has been fit for funding and was able to move at pace to bring in this £26 million of investment. The first thing I just want to pull out is that we were in good shape because of the work that had gone on across the City Council and pulling all the institutions and businesses across Norwich together to collaborate and build some working trust to actually get the 2040 vision in place. And those 5 themes have underpinned the town deal and made the whole community across Norwich aware of our intentions and what we want to do across the city. And those 5 themes obviously underpin the council's priorities, which are focusing on people, the environment and the inclusive economy. So it meant that when the town deal funding was first offered at the end of 2019, we were already up and running in terms of our main themes. We already had some great ideas, and that really is a vital point of what the council team had put together as a pipeline of projects, which meant we were able to move very, very quickly at a real pace. So whilst other cities and towns were scrambling around starting from scratch or cobbling together lots of different views on what the priorities were, we were already there. And that meant we could really energise getting the board together and getting a cross-section of people together across Norwich who were already used to working together, and then realised there's much more benefit in concentrating on the 90% of things we can all agree on, rather than arguing about the 10% of stuff that we can't. So, great that the theme was against skills and regeneration of the city. The projects came forward, we shortlisted the 8 projects that finally went forward, and we were able to put all of the work into government on time. And in fact, we were the first of 7 cities or towns to actually put our overall business plan in place, which meant we were among the first 7 to get the funding agreed, which meant we could then go on and work on the business cases and get those through. So that pace was so important for us, and we've carried that through to be the first delivery of a town deal project in the whole of the UK with the Digitech factory at City College. So it was brilliant to open that in September, officially opened in September last year. We obviously had a ministerial visit on the back of that achievement, which is brilliant for us as a city and trying to promote where we want to be in our aspirations going forward. So there's some really strong messages that come out, and it's only when you work with other towns and cities you realise what a privileged situation that I'm in as chair. It means that it's very efficient. Some other chairs are having to spend up to half of their working week just navigating the complexity of their environment to make things work. I would love to invest that amount of time in all things Norwich, but I haven't needed to. The resource and the capability around the City Council team has been excellent, and Sarah obviously joining at the end of last year, we've now got a really efficient programme delivery, which means we can de-risk some of the delivery going forward. So that's our priority, and I'll finish up in terms of focusing on delivery over the next 18 months to 2 years. We have got some significant risks based on cost and supply issues, which we are managing through month by month, but it's great to have that support across the whole board and the ongoing support from the council. We're hopeful that if this team continues to work well together, that it has a part to play. When further funding streams came in with the Community Renewal Fund, the County Council in this case was able to come to the Norwich Town Deal Board and quickly identify those projects that would benefit the city with that additional funding, which meant we were able to secure over another £3 million of funding for projects within the city. And we as a community across the whole Eastern region brought in a lot more funding proportionally than we'd ever done before because of the ability to bring those ideas forward really quickly. So, first of all, priority, yes, we've got to deliver the Towns deal, but I think going forward, there's some opportunity there from the way we've learned to work together that may benefit Norwich going forward. So, I can take any questions in terms of the broad overview. I know that Sarah Graham will want to speak on the delegated authority part of the paper, but any immediate questions that I can take forward?
So, colleagues, any questions anybody would like to raise or comments? Yes, Lucy.
Thank you. It's a really great project, and well, more than a project really, but I just wanted to ask about the Revolving Fund project at this point. That seems a very exciting part of it to me as a ward councillor, having seen over many years derelict sites that have proven impossible to do anything about, and seeing the impact that has on the community. It's really good to have the power to do something as a council about that. Will there be more money coming into that strand? Do you get the sense that it's an area that's got legs that will carry on, or will, because the fund will obviously dwindle as it's used?
Yes, I'll pass over to Graham Nelson in a moment, but I think it's one of the areas which was seen as very imaginative, that Norwich batting above its weight in terms of creating a revolving fund. It's something normally you get with conurbations like Manchester or Liverpool, and certainly when Neil O'Brien visited as the MP and the Minister for the area, he complimented us on our ability to put that together and being bold enough to put that into the plan. So I'm certainly hopeful for a chair's position that that's a model that we can use going forward and get more funding into it. But if I pass over to Graham, we might be able to give us a little bit more detail on this.
I'm not sure there's a great deal to add to that comprehensive answer, Andrew. The issue with the Revolving Fund is we went on a bit of a journey with it in terms of its formulation, because as you'll be well aware from a number of things, particularly in your ward, it's been a cause of frustration for many years that certain sites that have been screaming out for development have sat idle effectively, for clear examples of market failure and in some cases just intransigence on the part of their landowners. But we've never really had the resources in place to tackle them ourselves. We've clearly found a way as the City Council to tackle at least one of those long-held sites in relation to the King's Arms, where we're actually on site building away at the moment. But the idea behind the Revolving Fund was to see if we could get the resources to magnify those activities, to do it more, and in doing it more for actually, to some extent, for us not need to use those powers, because the people who are sitting on those sites will realise actually there might, there's something that could come along that could make it less comfortable for them to sit on those sites idle. So in a way, just because there might be a future which sees we might not need to use all of those funds, because the very fact that you've got them may provide the incentive to shift a bit. But when we started with the particular, what was then MHCLG on negotiating it, this was the one they took a deeper breath and thought we might need to have further discussions about. But when we actually came through to the formal approval of the business cases at the end of the process, actually they'd had a complete bob fuss around it, and they put us in contact with a number of other areas and tried to encourage some of the other areas that are following behind us in Thames Fund to learn from what we're doing and to replicate this sort of relatively innovative thinking. So in terms of how it's constituted, you would expect the funding to diminish over time. For each time you do something, it'll come back as less. But there's a degree of risk and uncertainty about that, and believe me when we say, as we tackle it, the option, we will do everything that we can to effectively minimise that loss that you get, and there's nothing within the system that would prevent us from not making a loss, if you know what I mean. It's just that particularly if we end up with lengthy bureaucratic processes around compulsory purchase, they will be expensive. But if that's what it takes to unlock sites that need to be developed, that's where we need to go, and that's the purpose of the fund.
Thank you. Sarah, would you like to say anything?
Yes, you know what I'm like, Alan. Very happy to say something, Vicky Leader. I think the Revolving Fund is a good example of how the town deal funding can really help the city. It is a priority of ours to revolve it by its nature and its name. However, the key fact of putting that business case together was to make sure that sites that were stalled and blighting communities, having antisocial behaviour issues and things like that, were moved on. So we may not, as Graham has said, we will no doubt make a loss in some of these areas because that could be a reason why they haven't been moved on by the landowners. But really the key thing that we want to ensure is that the communities benefit by those pieces of land being developed for various reasons, for uses. And you know, we will do everything we can to ensure that there is money going back to Revolve again, but the key is to improve the communities around.
Thank you very much. Sarah Gale.
So, a couple of comments. I think it's, you know, the paper is really very self-explanatory, but we are leading the way. And I will talk a little bit about the Revolving Fund because to ward cancers, I know how important that is. And I was out on site this morning at the King's Arms site. You know, you can actually see the houses now. I stood in what will be the bungalow, and it's really, really exciting on when you see the land, which when it was flattened didn't seem particularly big, but now you can see 5 homes that are going to be there, and some of them quite big ones, and you know, the community will see the whole benefit of that, and it's really very exciting and very powerful when you're out on site. So yes, thank you for this. I think it's an incredible piece of work, and it does lay a marker down to those who are sitting on site that we will take action, we will do something, and we've got proof that we are doing it. So thank you.
Thank you, Gail. Any further comments from anybody? No, well, that's an excellent piece of work, and it's really, really good to have both of you here this afternoon to tell us about things from your perspective, and very much appreciated. We do have a below the line. I don't know the script now. We do have a below the line element to this paper, which before we give to the recommendations, we need to consider whether we need to go below the line to pick up any questions or comments. Can I ask Cabinet colleagues if anybody wishes to go below the line in the terms of paper? No, I'm seeing no, so we can go straight to the recommendations on page 103. And there are 2 recommendations, which is to note the current position and the governance arrangements in place for the programme, and we've been expert input from our 2 guests, as well as a very clear exposition about the Revolving Fund. I would certainly like to see the Earl of Leicester site, as was, dealt with. I remember when I was a younger man working at the West Norwich Hospital, and we used to go to the Earl of Leicester for a drink at lunchtime. I wasn't a doctor or anything else. I wasn't doing anything terribly serious. I was just trying to keep the hospital clean, or my bit of the ward clean, and providing lunches for patients. But you know, that's been demolished for many years now, and it's a real eyesore. So if we can get that away at some point, that would be great. So we've got a delegated authority as a second bullet point, action point. Can we agree those recommendations? Please indicate. Thank you very much. So you are welcome to stay for the rest of the agenda, but I would quite understand if you have other pressing issues like going home to tea. Okay, and thanks again to both of you. Can we now go on to the next item, which is on page 133, which relates to improving the diversity of the council's workforce. I shall make some introductory remarks, but I know Stephen will want to speak to this, and we have Dawn with us this evening as well. So we know that politically we have made this one of our priorities, and we have set in train an action plan to improve the diversity of the workforce, and this is going to be a regular item in terms of being picked up in the annual progress report against the new corporate plan, which we discussed and passed at last night's full council meeting. And it will also form part of the refresh of the council's equality information report. On page 134, the commitment is expressed in the first paragraph. We have the highest diversity economically active population in Norfolk by some distance. And we have already considered an outline strategy in March 2021. And we've identified 3 key themes, that's in paragraph 5, recruitment practices to attract a diverse candidate pool, to build an inclusive workplace and create the right culture where people from all backgrounds feel included, valued and comfortable, and look at some planning around objective workforce and succession planning to support the retention and progression of talented employees, which should be very much at the heart of what we do across the workforce. There are a number of actions and comments on the next 2 pages. And then there are the issues around increased workforce reporting of protected characteristics and areas where there needs to be some more data gathering. And it therefore also sets out some of the training that has taken place as a part of this programme. And there's some very helpful data on recruitment and selection profile, and where the trends are moving in a positive direction, it is evident. So with those brief introductory remarks, Stephen, would you like to add any points? I know this is a particular commitment when you joined the authority that you wanted to drive forward.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Leader. As you say, last year, Cabinet agreed a strategy and an action plan for increasing the ethnicity of the workforce. And as a council, we've lagged behind the diversity mix of the city we're here to serve. And for me, that's a problem because it means we're not as representative as an organisation as we need to be. We acknowledged last year that it will take time for the results to show, but we're determined to make progress. As increasing the diversity of our workforce ultimately makes us more representative, it makes us a richer organisation, it brings different perspectives and ideas. So the report sets out some of the actions we've taken, and there's some data in there. In summary, we've made some good progress against the action plan. To pick out a few points, we've increased the reporting of protected characteristics by staff, but there's a lot of work to do on that. Unconscious bias training has been rolled out to all colleagues. It's also been made available to councillors. A new programme of equality, diversity and inclusion training has also been developed and piloted. So there's 2 programmes. There's a module for all colleagues focusing on how to be inclusive, and one specifically aimed at managers, which looks at the importance of inclusive leadership. Our recruitment and selection training has been reviewed and updated for all recruiting managers, and that's going to be rolled out in April. The data in the report shows that generally there's been some improvement at shortlisting stage and some improvement at offer stage, but I think what that shows to me, that table, is that percentages of applicants from the people of ethnic minority groups are too low at all stages of the process. They're too low at application stage, they're too low at shortlisting stage, and they're too low at appointment stage. So there's further work to do, and that goes, that starts from the outset of how are we describing the jobs, how are we marketing the city council, the language we use, where we're looking for candidates. All of that has got to be rethought and redesigned. Quality checks on shortlisted candidates have been extended to include race and ethnicity, and the impact of this is going to be evaluated later in the year. We've had a number of workshops with managers, and we're looking at using alternative media channels to improve the candidate pool. We've also researched and currently evaluating diversity-focused job posting channels, and we're investigating some software tools to identify any bias in our recruitment and job descriptions. So overall, a lot of work is going on. It's an ongoing process. There has been a positive direction of travel. It's going to take time, but we've seen a slight upward trajectory. So 4.16 of colleagues from an ethnic diversity group in December last year compared to 3.1% the year before. But it was still behind. That still compares to 9% of people in Norwich from an ethnic minority group. So I'm pleased that we're taking action. I'm pleased that we're building some momentum. I'm pleased that we're starting to see some progress, but it's going to be an ongoing commitment and an ongoing piece of work.
Thanks, Stephen. Dawn, have you any points you'd like to make?
I've not got anything further to add to that. Thank you, Councillor.
Thank you. Open it up for questions and comments from Cabinet colleagues. Can't see anybody. Lucy, have you any questions you'd like to make?
Yes, please, I do. Thank you, Councillor Waters. So in 2019, the government published some really clear guidance about employers being advised to measure socio-economic background as well, because it intersects very closely with other aspects, other protected characteristics, and it actually helps understand the workforce in relation to that and how it relates to the general population, and how far an employer can contribute to social mobility. So I just wanted to raise that here as perhaps an element that could be explored going forward to add to that, and to ask if that has been thought about. So to date, quality reports don't actually include reporting on socio-economic background, but would the Council consider committing to assessing that crucial characteristic and include an aim to strive for representativeness in relation to socio-economic background in its workforce as well, because that is very clearly advice going forward. Thank you.
So I can see the intersections between class and ethnicity and gender, for example. There's an interesting question. Do we note it?
I think so. I think we can look at that through our annual quality assessment and the work we do around that. It's still here, but whether whether we've got access to data around that, this would be the first step. But we can certainly we'll take that away and look at how we can build some of that in. Thanks.
Yes, and of course we've also got over the last year, and coming into the council to the last two joint ventures, a significant increase in the size and occupational activity of the workforce delivering the services to the council. So yes, a helpful point. Thank you very much. Right. Any other questions or comments on that? Can we please go back to the recommendations on page 133? Recommendations 1 and 2, which I outlined at the beginning of the report. All those in favour? Please indicate. Thank you very much. Right, let's now move on to something which will gladden everybody's heart, which is the award of a contract for loft and cavity wall installation to council-owned properties. Over to you, Councillor Harris.
Thank you. So we're certainly getting towards the end of the meeting, but this is a report which I'm sure we'll all welcome and support. This is a contract with an estimated value of 2.5 million, excluding VAT, over 5 years. This is a big investment in our council-owned homes. The contract is to appoint a single supplier, mainly to deliver loft and cavity wall insulation to council homes, although there are some auxiliary works or products included within the contract. The work is designed to improve energy efficiency of council-owned homes, reducing the carbon footprint of the dwelling and the tenants' utility bills. I think that we're all aware of the worry that the soaring costs of energy are causing all of our residents at the moment. Works are mainly of a planned nature, so works for the first year of the contract have already been identified, as long as we give our approval toward the contract tonight. It should be noted that there might also be some additional and responsive upgrade work to be identified during the first year of the contract and throughout the duration of the contract. The contract period is for 5 years, consisting of an initial 3-year term, with the option to extend for a further 2 years, depending on satisfactory performance and annual budget approval. This, to me, seems a very sensible approach which we've taken with 7 of our contracts recently. We estimate that 400 to 500 properties will benefit from the installations each year. A competition procurement process was carried out by Eastern Procurement Limited. There were 7 suppliers on the framework, a further benchmarking exercise was undertaken, and then tenders were evaluated. First choice installations offered the best value for money from the benchmarking exercise. The value of the work is up to a maximum of 500,000 each year, and we expect the contract to start on the 1st of April 2022. So I move back to the recommendation on page 141 to approve the award of a contract for loft and cavity wall insulation work to First Choice Installations Limited from the 1st of April 2022 to the 31st of March 2027 at an estimated value of 2.5 million, excluding VAT, over 5 years, which is 500,000 per annum. The final award value will be within the existing allocated budget. And I've got Stephen here. This is his first cabinet meeting, so if he wants to add to anything to what I've said or answer questions, I'm sure he'd be more than happy to do so.
Stephen, welcome. Good to see you. Do say something. Since it's your first meeting, your maiden speech at the cabinet meeting.
Thank you very much. I don't really have anything further to add to the cabinet report, but it's work that we've been doing for a number of years now. The contract with this potential successful bidder is the incumbent contractor, and they do the work to a good standard. So.
Well, that's what we want. We want good quality work for such a significant investment. Do I take it everybody's happy? I mean, you'd like the figures to be, 50 times that, but, as we all would, but this is good news, isn't it? Great. You wanted to say something?
Yeah, I just want to say brilliant. Congratulations, it's really, really good to have that money. I wanted to ask how it can be used, the work, to inform, is there a strand of way we can get information out of this to inform the work, long-term plans? It's obviously a fraction of the homes that need insulating, but is there a channel within this so that we can learn from it to actually get all the homes insulated?
I can just come in. I think one of the things that we are looking at is revisiting the SAP ratings of all the properties to see where we are, because I suppose what I would suggest is SAP ratings are fairly old. If they've had insulation, it could be that the insulation is settled or degenerated, it might be a better way of putting it. And on the back of that, to see if there are other funds that we can go through, warm front funding, etc., that will help to offset some of the money that we're already paying, but as a separate tranche of work as well. And I suppose one of the things I would add to this about the ancillary works that potentially there is, if we take a fabric first approach, what we're looking to do is a whole house methodology of how we approach this. So what we don't want to do is just do it in isolation. We want to do it, but we want to make sure it's a joined up approach so we get the whole package delivered. That will take some planning, and it's not something that I would be able to say right now, this is what we're going to do and how we're going to do it. but it's using the information to design the plan moving forward over the next 5, 10, ever years, basically.
Excellent, very good story, and forward-looking agenda, as it has been for many years with this council. Right, can we agree the recommendations and please indicate? Great, thank you. And let's go on to item number 9. More good news on this theme. The award of a contract for sustainable water grant delivery. And that's Councillor Hampton. Over to you.
Thank you. This paper asks us to award contractor E.ON to deliver retrofit insulation measures for private sector homes in the city, and this is following the council's successful bid for £3.1 million from the Sustainable Water Competition. This will fund a range of insulation measures, including solar panels and loft and cavity wall insulation, that will cover 200 homes. The focus is going to be on low-income households and on areas with higher levels of fuel poverty. It's expected that delivering these measures will save 200,000 kilograms of CO2 per year and £250,000 in bill savings per year. So this again meets our aims of tackling the climate crisis in a socially just way. We welcome this opportunity and will continue to make the most of any further funding you can bid for. We'll also continue to look at other models of delivering measures, obviously preferably on a bigger scale, and not to reopen the arguments of last night, but we do still need the government to step up and properly invest in retrofitting and in councils in order for this work to be done on the scale we desperately need to tackle both those cost of living and climate crises. As things stand, we're having to chase pots of money which are often competitive or specific, don't stretch to that many properties sometimes, and can have restricted timescales. This makes it challenging to take a whole house approach and for the sector to have confidence in training and retaining staff, for example. But in the meantime, this is a good news story for us. These works will make a real tangible difference to the 200 low-income households set to benefit. The recommendation today is to award the contract for these retrofit insulation measures to E.ON Energy, and that's following last night's approval of the capital programme. And of course, lastly, thank you to Rachel and everyone else involved in bringing this paper forward and in putting this successful bid together in the first place.
In fact, Rachel, I remember receiving the email that you circulated about the successful investment we got from the government of £3.1 million. So thank you and your colleagues for the work you've done to bring that money to the council to the benefit of residents in the city. Is there anything you'd like to add?
No, I think Emma covers all of that really well, but obviously if anyone does have any questions on the scheme, I'm happy to answer them.
Thank you. Okay, any questions from Cabinet colleagues? Lucy, anything from you on this?
Yeah, thank you again to say that's brilliant, well done. 200 homes is only 200 homes, but it is 200 homes, so that's amazing. Is that scheme going to be repeated? I know it's hard to just chase individual pots of grant like that, but sometimes you can kind of, they have follow-on or money left over. And is 200 homes kind of what other places got, or is it possible to go in with a higher amount another time?
So at the moment, I don't know if there is going to be plans. Sorry for Base to repeat it. Obviously, every single conversation we have with them about any pot funding, we say, please, we need more and we need longer times to do it. I would say 200 is similar to what the councils are doing. Obviously, we'd love to do more. We'd love to upgrade every home in the city, but we have to be realistic in terms of the delivery timescale for this one. And we believe that this is a realistic amount that we can do. And we will continue to say to Base, let's keep this funding going. Let's keep doing this.
Yeah, and this will be a high quality piece of work, and we've got a very good reputation of investing in these initiatives, so I'm sure we'll be up there in terms of the government's allocation of funds. Right, so there's a recommendation on page 147. Can we agree that recommendation, please? Thank you very much. That's excellent. Two very lifting reports. Can we now go to the last item we have on the agenda, which is on the supplementary agenda, page 15, which is the renewal of a Microsoft Enterprise license, which is important to get underway, otherwise Microsoft switch everything off. Over to you, Paul.
Thank you very much, Chair. Well, as you might notice, I and quite a few other members have their laptops here, and I'm sure we're all using Microsoft equipment. Outlook, of course. I use Word as another program I use quite heavily, and occasionally I actually use Excel. I must admit I haven't quite got to databases quite yet. But I think we would all accept that such software is vital for not only myself, but all members of our staff to operate efficiently on behalf of this organisation. And what this paper, which is very self-explanatory, states is that we will obviously need to enter into a further licence agreement to extend our ability to use Microsoft products over the next 3 years. I'm sure Julie's here if you'd like to ask further on to this matter.
Julia, sorry.
I haven't really got anything to add. Councillor Kendrick sort of outlined that we use these regularly every day. They're entwined in many of our softwares as well. And our telephony system is dependent on that Microsoft platform of SharePoint and Microsoft Teams. Happy to answer any questions.
So we need to agree this, don't we?
Yeah, we do.
Anybody got any techie questions they want to ask? Lucy, you have a techie question or a non-techie question?
It's not really very techie. I wouldn't know how to ask one, but I know that we use obviously Teams a lot more now and SharePoint a lot more, and just observed really that for councillors there's a lot more that we could do to work with officers, and is there any chance of any work being done to look at how we can make better use of it across the council for councillors and officers working together, perhaps project planning or actually there's you know, I get the feeling we only use sort of a fraction of what we could, even in Teams alone, and it'd be really nice to support councillors to be involved in that. It'd be much more efficient, I think, sometimes, and keep a better record as well, and perhaps be more open.
Yeah, we are developing our Microsoft collaboration tools, and as part of that we'll have online learning, and we can look at how we can sort of share that with members. Yeah.
Okay, any further questions? Can we agree the recommendation on page 15 of the supplementary report? Okay, thank you very much. That concludes our business this evening. Thank you very much for your attendance.